Libraries, repositories of knowledge, history, and imagination. They stand as silent sentinels guarding the collected wisdom of humanity. But what happens when the stories within their walls whisper back, when the very air seems thick with secrets long forgotten? This is the unsettling tale of a place where the line between fiction and reality blurs, where the written word takes on a life of its own. Our story unfolds in a small town, a place where time seemed to drift by at a slower pace. The Ashwood Public Library, a grand old building with towering shelves and echoing halls, stood as a testament to a bygone era. Its worn stone facade and ivy-covered walls whispered tales of countless hours spent lost in the pages of forgotten books. Generations had passed through its doors, seeking solace in its quiet corners, their lives intertwining with the very fabric of the building. But beneath its veneer of tranquility, a darkness stirred, a current of unease that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to venture too deep. It began subtly, in hushed whispers among the regulars, tales of strange occurrences within the library's hallowed halls. Unexplained noises, flickering lights, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Some dismissed it as mere superstition, the ramblings of overactive imaginations. But others, those who felt the library's pulse, knew that something was amiss. Something sinister lurked within its depths, something that watched and waited, its secrets hidden amongst the countless volumes lining its shelves. Eleanor Vance, a young writer, moved to a small town seeking inspiration. Drawn to the Ashwood Public Library, she felt an immediate connection. The library's hushed atmosphere and aged books intrigued her. One day she discovered a hidden alcove, its air heavy and undisturbed for decades. Dust motes danced in the faint light. The shelves in this forgotten corner were crammed with books bound in leather and ancient-looking tomes with iron clasps. Eleanor ran her fingers along their spines, her pulse quickening with anticipation. She had always been drawn to the unknown, and this hidden section felt like a treasure trove. As she delved deeper, her hand brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a small, ornate box. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside lay a single, pristine book. As she opened it, a strange energy crackled in the air. Her name, Eleanor Vance, stared back at her in stark black ink. Eleanor. The name seemed to leap off the aged page, a whisper from the void. Eleanor's pulse quickened. A cold dread crept up her spine, chilling her to the bone. How could her name be in this ancient book? It felt like a cruel joke. The date next to her name was her birth date. The air in the alcove grew colder, the silence pressing in on her. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page. The book felt warm in her hands, as if infused with a strange energy. An energy that both terrified and compelled her to keep reading. This wasn't just a book, it was a mirror reflecting her deepest secrets. Eleanor slammed the book shut, her heart pounding against her ribs. Fear, raw and primal, coursed through her veins. Who could have written this? And how did they know so much about her? Fleeing the library, Eleanor felt a sense of dread cling to her like a shroud. The book's words echoed in her mind, each syllable a hammer blow to her sanity. The familiar streets of the town suddenly seemed menacing. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden observer. She had stumbled onto something dark and insidious. Back in her apartment, the book lay on her table like a venomous serpent. She couldn't bring herself to touch it. The book's secrets wormed their way into her thoughts. Had she imagined the whole thing? Was it all just a stress-induced hallucination? She longed to dismiss it as a figment of her imagination. Days turned into sleepless nights. The book's presence loomed over Eleanor. She tried to focus on her writing, but the words felt hollow. The book's secrets whispered to her in the dead of night. She had to know more. She had to understand how such a thing was possible. With a mix of trepidation and morbid curiosity, Eleanor reached for the book once more. As she carefully turned the pages, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. The handwriting changed subtly as she progressed through the book. It was still elegant, still meticulously crafted, but there was a subtle shift in style, or perhaps by the same hand at different points in time. The realization sent a fresh wave of chills down her spine. This wasn't just a diary, it was a chronicle, passed down through generations, each entry adding another layer to the mystery. The book wasn't just about her, it chronicled the lives of other women, women who had lived in this town generations ago, women who, like her, had stumbled upon this book and found their lives detailed within its pages. The book spoke of a lineage, a connection between these women and a dark secret that bound them together. Eleanor pored over the entries, each page a brushstroke painting a picture of a hidden history. She learned of their hopes, their dreams, their fears, and ultimately, their disappearances. The book claimed that these women, her ancestors, had been chosen, marked by fate to become vessels for something ancient and powerful. Something that lurked in the shadows, watching, waiting for the right moment to claim its inheritance. Eleanor scoffed at the absurdity of it all. Curses, prophecies, ancient evils, they were the stuff of fiction, not reality. And yet, as she delved deeper into the book, a seed of doubt took root in her mind. Could there be some truth to these outlandish claims? The book described a ritual, a ceremony that would unleash this ancient power, merging it with the chosen vessel. And according to the book, Eleanor was the last of her line, the final piece in a puzzle centuries in the making. Panic swelled in her chest, threatening to consume her. She had to stop it. She had to break the cycle. But how could she fight against something she didn't understand, something that seemed to hold her life in its grasp? Driven by a mixture of fear and desperation, Eleanor decided to confront the one person she thought might be able to help. The town librarian, Mrs. Hawthorne. Mrs. Hawthorne, a frail woman with a sharp wit and an encyclopedic knowledge of the library's contents, had always treated Eleanor with a strange mix of kindness and caution. It was as if she knew something, some secret she was hesitant to reveal. Eleanor found Mrs. Hawthorne in her usual spot, surrounded by ancient tomes. The air crackled with unseen energy, making Eleanor's skin crawl. With trembling hands, Eleanor explained everything. Mrs. Hawthorne seemed to already know. She sat in silence, her gaze distant. The silence was thick with unspoken words. Finally she spoke, her voice a low rasp. The book holds a power beyond your comprehension. A power that has haunted this town for generations. Eleanor listened, her unease growing. Mrs. Hawthorne's words confirmed her darkest fears. The librarian spoke of an ancient evil, an evil bound to the town through a pact that required a sacrifice. The women in your book were chosen just as you were, their fates sealed to appease a hunger. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Mrs. Hawthorne's voice, raspy with age and heavy with sorrow, painted a chilling picture of the town's history. She spoke of her ancestor, who made a deal with a dark entity for the town's prosperity at a terrible cost. Every generation, a young woman's life was chronicled in the book, her destiny predetermined. Eleanor listened with horror and disbelief, feeling trapped by the book's eerie accuracy. Was she just another pawn in this ancient game, her life a chapter already written? The entity, Mrs. Hawthorne continued, her voice barely above a whisper, it feeds on knowledge, on the intimate details of human lives. The book, it is the conduit, a living record of each chosen woman's existence. She paused, her gaze meeting Eleanor's with an almost unbearable intensity. It knows your thoughts, Eleanor, it knows your fears, it knows your every hope and dream. Eleanor recoiled as if struck. The air in the room felt suddenly suffocating, the weight of the unseen entity pressing down on her like a physical force. She had felt its presence before, lurking in the shadows of her mind, whispering insidious suggestions in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep. But now, The entity felt closer than ever, its gaze burning into her soul. Mrs. Hawthorne pointed to a row of portraits lining the wall behind Eleanor, each one depicting a woman with hauntingly familiar features. "These were my ancestors," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Each one chosen, each one consumed by the entity's hunger. The portraits, once merely decorative, now seemed to pulsate with a dark energy, the eyes of the women staring out with an unnerving intensity. Eleanor's gaze darted from one portrait to the next, their gazes seeming to follow her every move. She saw herself reflected in their eyes, the same fear, the same sense of helplessness. They were her blood, her lineage, and their fate felt inextricably linked to her own. The weight of generations of suffering pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. Mrs. Hawthorne's voice, laden with a lifetime of sorrow and regret, broke the heavy silence. "The ritual," she whispered, "is the culmination of the entity's hold. A merging of flesh and spirit, a final consummation of the pact." Her voice cracked with emotion. "It is the reason for the book, for the meticulous chronicling of your lives. It is the key to the entity's power." The passage Mrs. Hawthorne indicated described a ceremony that chilled Eleanor to the bone. It spoke of a night, bathed in the light of a blood moon, when the chosen woman would be taken to a hidden chamber beneath the library. There, amidst ancient symbols and unholy relics, the entity would claim its prize, consuming her essence and drawing her into its shadowy realm. The details were vague, shrouded in cryptic language and veiled threats, but the message was clear. Resistance was futile. Eleanor's mind reeled. She had stumbled upon a truth far more sinister, far more ancient than she could have ever imagined. The library, a place she had once considered a sanctuary, a haven for knowledge and imagination, now felt like a gilded cage, a repository for secrets that could shatter her sanity. The air seemed thick with unseen eyes, the silence pregnant with unspoken threats. She had to escape. She had to break free from the clutches of this ancient evil, for her own sake and for the sake of generations to come. But how could she fight against something so deeply rooted, so intricately woven into the fabric of the town itself? The task seemed insurmountable, yet a spark of defiance ignited within her. "There must be a way to stop it," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with fear and determination. She couldn't accept her fate, destined to become another sacrifice to an ancient hunger. She had to believe there was a way to break the cycle, to sever the chains. Mrs. Hawthorne met Eleanor's gaze with pity and resignation. "Generations of my family have tried," she said, her voice heavy with defeat. "But the entity's hold is too strong. The pact, it cannot be broken." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of centuries of failed attempts. Eleanor refused to accept defeat. She had to believe there was a way, even if it meant defying centuries of tradition. She thought of the women in the portraits, their faces frozen in time. She wouldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. She would find a way to break free. But as she delved deeper into the book, a sense of dread washed over her. The entity, it seemed, had anticipated her every move. The book, it wasn't just a chronicle of her life, it was a blueprint. Every attempt at rebellion only served to further the entity's plan. "We have to fight," Eleanor said, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. She knew the odds were stacked against them, but she refused to surrender to despair. Mrs. Hawthorne placed a hand on Eleanor's arm. "There might be one way," she whispered. She spoke of a hidden chapter in the book, a dangerous gamble that could break the entity's hold. Together they pored over the ancient texts, deciphering cryptic verses. The plan was fraught with danger, a desperate gamble requiring unwavering faith. They would delve into the heart of the entity's lair, a hidden chamber beneath the library. The fate of generations rested on their shoulders. Armed with a flickering lantern, Eleanor and Mrs. Hawthorne descended deeper into the library's bowels. The air grew heavy with mildew and decay. Each step took them deeper into the unknown. Eleanor felt they were entering a beast's belly. The lantern cast grotesque shadows on the walls, cobwebs clung to every surface. Eleanor's heart pounded against the silence. Mrs. Hawthorne consulted the book urgently. The ancient script offered cryptic clues. They were treading on hallowed ground. With each step the air grew colder. Eleanor felt the entity's presence growing stronger. She fought the urge to turn back, but she knew there was no escape. She had come too far to turn back now. The staircase ended abruptly at a heavy wooden door, its surface blackened with age and etched with strange, unsettling symbols. The air around the door throbbed with an unseen energy, a palpable hum that set Eleanor's teeth on edge. The symbols seemed to writhe and twist before her eyes, whispering tales of forgotten rituals and unspeakable sacrifices. Mrs. Hawthorne, her face pale and drawn in the flickering lantern light, traced the symbols with a trembling hand, her lips moving silently as she recited an ancient incantation from the book. The air grew thick with anticipation, charged with the weight of centuries of expectation. Eleanor held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs as if trying to escape its confines. With a groan of protest, the door creaked open, revealing a large, dusty chamber beyond. The air within was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of decay and the lingering echoes of countless whispers, each one a fragment of a forgotten life, a lost soul claimed by the entity's insatiable hunger. The chamber was dimly lit by flickering torches that lined the walls, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort like living things. The walls were lined with shelves stacked high with ancient tomes bound in leather and human bone. Strange symbols and diagrams adorned every surface, their meanings lost to time but their power undeniable. Eleanor's gaze swept over the chamber, taking in the macabre beauty of this forgotten place, the unsettling juxtaposition of knowledge and darkness. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines of the books, their titles a litany of forgotten languages and forbidden knowledge. The air hummed with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of power that both terrified and intrigued her. She felt a strange connection to this place, as if she had been here before, in another life, another time. Mrs. Hawthorne, her voice barely a whisper, drew Eleanor's attention to the center of the chamber, where a large ornate book lay open on a pedestal. The book, bound in what appeared to be human skin, pulsed with an eerie inner light, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the chamber walls. This was no ordinary book. This was the heart of the entity's lair, the repository of its power, the chronicle of its long and bloody reign. As they approached the pedestal, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a chorus of tormented souls. Eleanor could almost make out words, fragments of sentences, pleas for mercy, and cries of despair. The entity's presence was almost overwhelming, a suffocating pressure that threatened to crush her spirit. She fought to maintain her composure, to focus on the task at hand. The book pulsed with a sickly light, its pages filled with disturbing illustrations and prophecies, written in a language that seemed to writhe and shift before her eyes. Eleanor could feel the entity's gaze upon them, a palpable weight that pressed down on her, threatening to break her resolve. She knew they were treading a dangerous path, but she had come too far to turn back now. The fate of generations rested on her shoulders, and she would not falter. As Eleanor reached out to touch the book, a cold, disembodied voice echoed through the chamber, seeming to emanate from the very walls themselves. "So, the latest offering approaches," the voice hissed, its tone laced with amusement and a chilling hunger. "Have you come to fulfill your destiny, child? To offer yourself willingly to the embrace of eternity?" Eleanor's hand trembled, but her resolve held firm. She would not be swayed by the entity's seductive whispers or cowed by its veiled threats. She had come too far, sacrificed too much to be deterred now. "We are not here to be your puppets," Eleanor retorted, her voice echoing through the chamber, a lone beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. "We are here to break the cycle, to end your reign of terror once and for all." The chamber seemed to contract around them, the air growing thick and heavy with malice. The torches lining the walls flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like demons unleashed. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of tormented souls vying for their attention, their voices laced with a chilling mixture of despair and warning. "Foolish mortals," the entity's voice boomed, shaking the very foundations of the library. "Do you think you can defy the will of that which has existed since time immemorial? The pact has been sealed, the price set. Your defiance is but a fleeting amusement, a brief flicker before the eternal night consumes you." Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself between Mrs. Hawthorne and the pulsing book. She could feel the entity's gaze upon her, a tangible weight that pressed down on her, testing her resolve. But she would not be broken. She would not be another name in the book, another soul consumed by its insatiable hunger. "You have fed on the lives of innocent women for centuries," Eleanor accused, her voice ringing with righteous anger. "You have manipulated their destinies, feasted on their fears, and extinguished their light. But your reign of terror ends now." The air crackled with tension. The silence between Eleanor's words and the entity's response stretched thin and taut. The shadows in the chamber seemed to writhe and coil, as if the very fabric of the library itself strained against the entity's barely contained rage. "You misunderstand, child," the voice boomed, its tone shifting, a hint of desperation creeping into its chilling resonance. "I do not simply consume. I offer a different kind of existence, emerging with something vast, something eternal." The voice softened, becoming almost seductive. "Join me, Eleanor. Embrace your destiny. Become one with the infinite." Eleanor closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and steeled herself for the confrontation ahead. She knew that the entity's offer was a lie, a trap designed to lure her into eternal servitude. She had seen the fate of those who had come before her, their lives chronicled in the book, their spirits forever bound to this chamber of whispers. She would not suffer the same fate. The fate of generations rested on her shoulders, and she would not falter. Eleanor drew strength from the memory of the women whose portraits lined Mrs. Hawthorne's walls. She would honor their memory by fighting back with every fiber of her being. "I choose freedom," Eleanor declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. The entity, enraged by her defiance, unleashed a wave of raw power. The torches lining the walls flared and sputtered, casting grotesque shadows. The book on the pedestal throbbed violently, its pages flipping wildly. "You dare defy me?" the entity roared, its voice a cacophony of rage. "You are nothing but a vessel, a pawn in a game far beyond your comprehension." Undeterred by the entity's fury, Mrs. Hawthorne began to chant from the book. She had committed the ritual to memory, every word, every inflection. The air crackled with energy as she spoke, pushing back against the darkness. The entity, sensing a shift in power, turned its attention to Mrs. Hawthorne. "You think you can control forces you barely understand?" the entity mocked. "You are but a frail echo of a bloodline long since tainted by my touch. Your efforts are futile, your defiance meaningless." Eleanor knew they had to act quickly before the entity could regain its full strength. She had to distract it, to draw its attention away from Mrs. Hawthorne long enough for the ritual to take hold. But what could she, a mere mortal, possibly do to distract a being of such immense power? As if guided by an unseen hand, Eleanor's gaze fell upon a small, sharp object lying discarded on the floor near the pedestal. It was a piece of obsidian, its surface polished smooth by time and emanating a faint, unsettling hum. Instinct took over, and before she could even register what she was doing, Eleanor lunged towards the book, the obsidian clutched tightly in her hand. "No!" the entity roared, sensing a threat to its power. The The chamber vibrated with its fury, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. But Eleanor refused to be deterred. With a swift, decisive movement, she drove the obsidian towards the book, her heart pounding in her chest. A blinding flash of light erupted from the point of contact, throwing Eleanor backwards with a force that knocked the wind from her lungs. She lay sprawled on the cold stone floor, momentarily disoriented, her ears ringing from the deafening blast. As her vision cleared, she saw Mrs. Hawthorne still chanting, her voice unwavering despite the chaos swirling around them. The book on the pedestal pulsed erratically, its light flickering as if on the verge of being extinguished. The chamber around them seemed to warp and twist, the ancient stone walls rippling like water. The shelves lining the walls swayed precariously, ancient tomes tumbling to the ground with sickening thuds. The air crackled with energy, the very fabric of the library groaning under the strain of the entity's fury and its desperate struggle to maintain its hold. "You cannot defeat me!" The entity's voice boomed, its tone laced with desperation. "I am bound to this place, to this bloodline. You cannot escape your destiny." But even as it spoke, Eleanor could hear a tremor in its voice, a hint of fear that had been absent before. The obsidian, it seemed, had wounded it, disrupted its connection to the mortal realm. Eleanor, her body bruised but her spirit unbroken, struggled to her feet. She could feel the entity's power waning, its grip on the chamber loosening with every word that Mrs. Hawthorne uttered. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight that had pressed down on them lifting. Eleanor met Mrs. Hawthorne's gaze across the chamber, and in that moment, she understood. It wasn't just the ritual or the obsidian that was weakening the entity. It was their belief, their unwavering conviction that they could break the cycle that was tipping the scales. The entity had fed on their fear for centuries, but it had underestimated the power of their hope, their refusal to be defined by its darkness. Eleanor, her hand outstretched, met Mrs. Hawthorne's gaze across the chaotic chamber. Their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. They were in this together, two souls united against a common enemy. With a surge of adrenaline, Eleanor lunged forward, dodging falling debris and ignoring the searing pain in her side. Reaching Mrs. Hawthorne, she grasped her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture of defiance and shared hope. As their hands met, a surge of energy, raw and untamed, flowed between them, converging on the book like a bolt of lightning. The chamber pulsed with light, the ancient symbols on the walls flaring brightly as if awakening from a long slumber. The book throbbed violently, its pages turning rapidly as if caught in a whirlwind. The entity's voice rose to a deafening shriek, a mixture of rage and despair as it felt its power slipping away. "No, this is impossible!" the entity shrieked, its voice cracking with fury. "I am eternal, I cannot be defeated!" But even as it spoke, its voice began to fade, its words dissolving into a faint whisper that echoed through the chamber, a final impotent gasp of a dying god. The light intensified, engulfing the chamber in a blinding white glow. Eleanor closed her eyes against the brilliance, her ears ringing, her body tingling with a strange energy. Silence descended upon the chamber, heavy and absolute. The echoing whispers, the oppressive presence, all gone. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic drip of water. Eleanor and Mrs. Hawthorne stood, hands clasped, breaths ragged. Dust motes danced in the faint light, celebrating a victory. Eleanor's gaze fell upon the book, its pages blank. The entity's chronicle, its power, all erased. A wave of exhaustion washed over Eleanor. She swayed slightly, her knees threatening to buckle. Mrs. Hawthorne steadied her. "It's over," Mrs. Hawthorne whispered. "The cycle is broken." The words hung in the air, a fragile promise. Eleanor, her gaze fixed on the inert book, could barely process it. Generations of her family, their lives chronicled in that now blank book. They were free. The weight of their legacy lifted from her shoulders. Slowly, Eleanor and Mrs. Hawthorne made their way out of the chamber. The ascent up the narrow staircase now felt almost ordinary. With each step the events of the night seemed to recede, a nightmare fading with the coming dawn. They emerged from the library into the soft, nascent light of dawn. The town, usually bustling with activity at this hour, was eerily quiet, its inhabitants still slumbering, oblivious to the battle that had raged beneath their feet. The air, usually thick with the scent of baking bread and freshly brewed coffee, carried a faint metallic tang, a lingering echo of the entity's presence. Eleanor took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool, fresh air, the taste of freedom bittersweet on her tongue. As they stood on the steps of the library watching the town slowly awaken, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just within the library walls but within herself. The world seemed sharper, the colors more vibrant, the sounds more distinct. She felt a newfound sense of purpose, a clarity she had never known before. She turned to Mrs. Hawthorne, wanting to express her gratitude, to ask the countless questions swirling in her mind, but the librarian, her face etched with exhaustion, raised a hand, silencing her unspoken words. "Go," Mrs. Hawthorne whispered, her voice barely audible above the chirping of birds in a nearby tree. "Live your life, Eleanor. Be free." Eleanor hesitated, torn between her desire for answers and the undeniable truth in Mrs. Hawthorne's words. She knew that some things could not be explained, some burdens were meant to be carried alone. She had faced her destiny and emerged victorious. Now it was time to embrace the future, to write her own story, free from the shackles of the past. As she watched Eleanor disappear into the flow of the awakening town, Mrs. Hawthorne felt a familiar weight settle upon her shoulders. The entity might be gone, but the library remained. And with it, the responsibility to ensure that such darkness never again surfaced. She knew that the townspeople would need answers. She would provide them with carefully constructed truths, half-truths designed to comfort and reassure. The true extent of the entity's hold would remain buried within the library walls, guarded by silence and the passage of time. Mrs. Hawthorne turned and walked back into the library, the heavy oak door closing behind her with a resounding thud. She would become the keeper of the town's secrets, the guardian against the darkness that lingered at the edges of their collective memory. It was a lonely path she walked, but one she embraced with a stoic resignation. The library now held a different kind of magic for her, a bittersweet blend of loss and redemption. It was a reminder of the sacrifices made, the battles fought, and the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of shadows. As she navigated the labyrinthine aisles, her fingers trailing along the spines of countless volumes, she whispered a silent prayer for Eleanor, a plea for her to find peace, to live a life free from the shadows that had haunted their bloodline for far too long. Eleanor, bathed in the warmth of the rising sun, walked away from Ashwood without a backward glance. The town, once a refuge, now felt like a cage, its quaint charm overshadowed by darkness. She carried the weight of her experience but refused to let it define her. She would honor her ancestors by embracing the freedom they fought for. She would write their stories, giving voice to the voiceless. Free to write her own story, free to choose her destiny.